right, thanks. It's great to see everybody. So I think I know most of the people in the room, but I started the Corporate Startup Lab. I'm a Generative AI Fellow, so this is sort of a full circle moment for me, and it's really great to be here and see so many familiar faces. So many of you, the first time I met you was because you called somebody in central administration at Carnegie Mellon and said, hey, we want to figure out how to use machine learning or artificial intelligence in our business. And when they didn't know who to send you to, they sent you to me. So if you're wondering how you met me, that was often like, well, we're just not sure where to go, so we'll send them to Sean and we'll see what happens. And if you rewind the clock back, 5-6 years ago, companies like Moderna were reaching out to do this with us. Like basically the entire programs we built around things like the Moderna AI Institute that was co-developed with Carnegie Mellon was basically those words on the slide right now. So thank you, Moderna, for the millions of dollars, but this is the quick executive summary, and we had amazing impact with them. What we basically told them was, okay, most of the impact today around artificial intelligence is driven by machine learning technologies, right? So none of the things up here, and by the way, Dave was talking about Herb Simon and inventing the field here. If you read Herb's autobiography, Models of My Life, one of the things that's interesting is a lot of the things he's talking about you could classify as generative AI today. It's just we didn't have the technology to do it then. So a lot of the things he was hypothesizing were absolutely generative in nature. We just didn't have the technology to do it. And what's happened is over the 75 years about thinking about artificial intelligence, over and over again we've realized, wait a minute, maybe the best way to do this intelligence is with machine learning or with using statistical historical examples to do these actions, these intelligent actions that we're imagining. And so most of those around machine learning over the last 20 years has been this progression from, wow, it turns out machine learning is really good at predicting, to machine learning is really good at predicting and classifying, to machine learning is really good at predicting, classifying, and clustering. And each step along the way, there's been a killer app that sort of showed us how to actually do that action verb. And so when we go into these companies and we say, hey, we want to help you use machine learning better, a lot of what we do, and Nikki does a lot of these programs with me, we basically say like, hey, let's look for these action verbs in your company and let's figure out how to use machine learning to do that well. Well, what happened differently this time is that we added another verb, and unprompted, Phil used the same word this morning to describe generative AI, right? We've added this additional verb, which is to create. And if you think about like the predict, for example, because he put this on the slide, and I would have used the same thing. When Dave Mawhinney and I were starting a company to help people do quantitative trading, which is a lot like what Andrew was talking about with Quail, but we were doing it for just Renaissance Technology to Vanguard and kind of everybody in between, right? We were doing it on top of very structured information for machine learning prediction models. And the things we learned in the early 2000s about using machine learning prediction models inform how we do prediction in all of these cases. And one of the hypotheses we have that thankfully Ravi and the team at CIB supported was, wait a minute, if the killer app for each of these past things was sort of the economic function that created a ton of economic value, this is the most obvious thing I'll say all day. It turns out predicting if a stock price will go up or down is relatively economically valuable. If you don't believe me, go to Connecticut. There's a bunch of mansions there that will underwrite this hypothesis, right? But what we figured out there taught us how to do prediction when we're talking about like prediction in a drug discovery scenario with Moderna. So here's the question. We don't have the time that we did with the other three verbs to figure out generative AI, right? Because something happened, which is ChatGPT, which I would say is sort of analogous to the spreadsheet showing us that computers are good at computing. It went from 0 to 100 million users in 2 months. So everybody's trying to figure out how to do this generative AI thing. And so our hypothesis, which has proven pretty true over the last 5 or 6 months, is that I believe generative AI's killer application is going to be innovation. And I actually, as much as I love all the startups, and those of you who know me know I've invested in lots of startups and I love all the startups, there's this secret that when you get on the phone with lots of other VCs, I was on a Zoom call last week with about $20 billion in venture investors. And the secret that like one person sort of quietly said, and then everybody like, oh yeah, I had this, is like that unstructured data, that 80%, it's living in all of your corporate servers, right? Like the real, where the data is in the Fortune 500 companies all the way down to the small, medium-sized businesses, not the startups. I think startups have a key role to play here, but the data is living in these big companies. And so all of you have a incredibly valuable role to play. And so we believe the killer app is going to be innovation and helping each of your companies use that data to do innovation better. And that was the hypothesis that really underwrote the project that I've been working on with CIB this year and as other things, and sort of looking at generative AI as this killer application. Rather than me give you the update on that, I always believe that your collaborators and your people who are actually doing it are the best updates. So Karsten and Muno are going to be talking a little bit later about some of the things that are happening there. And so I'll just say, like, the impact is amazing and would love to talk to you about it. But there's another part of this, which is I think just like with machine learning and quantitative trading taught us how to do prediction, I think this is also going to teach us just generally how knowledge workers should look at generative AI. And I thought what I would do just for my 10 minutes, and I've never given a 10-minute talk before, so we'll see how this goes. But I thought what I would do in my 10 minutes is just give you two things that maybe you could take away from the second part, this blueprint for knowledge workers. So the first thing is, you guys know, if you've been around the Corporate Startup Lab for a while, I love thinking canvases, right? So pretty much as soon as we started thinking about CSL, we started creating these canvases to help people do corporate entrepreneurship better. And so I was kind of thinking about a lot of these generative AI things, and I was thinking, like, hey, we need to come up with a canvas, because if you talk to me in November after the CSL forum, I spent a bunch of time talking to you about the teller taxonomy. This was developed by the Big Data Lab, and for what it's worth, I still actually think what Santu and Donji have come up with is absolutely philosophically the right thing. But if I spend a bunch of time talking to you about the teller taxonomy, I'm sorry. I know that it was actually not that interesting to you. And basically the problem is this is not that helpful for 90% of the world. You know, for a guy like John Valenti, like, this is very, very helpful. For most of us, this is not that helpful. You've got to be at a certain sort of intersection of IQ and business acumen for this to be helpful. So we've created this. And many of you in the room have actually helped me test the early versions of this. This is will be kind of publicly available by the middle of May. And maybe there's a way we could let people know when it's publicly available. One of the lessons I took from the Corporate Startup Lab launching is we put some canvases out there quickly before we had done enough tests around this. And so many of you have early versions of that. We're trying to do a little bit more private deployment of it this time. But this is basically a canvas to help any large company think about the use cases they're trying to build out with generative AI. And we'll be publishing this in Miro by the middle of May. We're doing a webinar in the middle of May through the Tepper School that will be when we sort of unveil all of this. But I think this will be very helpful on figuring out these use cases. So that's the first of these roadmaps for knowledge workers. The second part of this is, I think we need to start thinking about these design patterns, right? So I have this hypothesis that 95% of all Gen AI projects inside enterprises today are really just RAG projects. I'll let Deloitte comment if 95% is too high or too low, but it feels like a lot of these end up being RAG projects, right? So if you're not familiar with RAG, there's sort of a broad spectrum of people here. RAG just stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. So one of the ways we solve this hallucination problem is that we basically replace the content we're using to generate the answers from a defined repository of content. So the idea here is that instead of going to ChatGPT and the trillion of documents that was trained on being the knowledge that's used, we're still using that language model, so we're still disambiguating between terms like novel and innovative, so both of those are being returned in the same query, but we're retrieving it from a defined universe of content. And then we're using the LLM to generate the answer. And it has all kinds of benefits, like better accuracy, faster, more personalized responses. So lots of benefits for businesses doing this. Lots of interesting real-world applications, so market research, customer support. Okay, so I think this is good, but this is sort of backward looking. When I think about, like, where is this going, I think what we're going to see is what I'm, for lack of a better term, and I'm not very good at branding, I would call RAG plus, right? So to me, and I'll do this in the context of a tool that we're going to probably, like, 95% open source for people, but many R&D professionals spend a ton of time reading technical academic journals, right? So if you think about your organizations where you have lots of R&D professionals working for you, right? A lot of what they do is most of those companies have like 100 to 200 sort of foundational academic articles that are like what drives the innovation. So we work with a large chemical company, right? There are about 150 chemical journal articles that are basically what everybody in that R&D organization should be aware of. Well, you know, this is a natural opportunity for using a RAG to kind of find the right article when you have a research problem. And this is, I think, kind of the sort of standard RAG deployment today. You know, every time I think like, okay, this is the best approach to building a RAG, you know, Anthropic or OpenAI comes out with a new approach to it. The reality is like the underlying models to do this are getting better and better. But the relevant point here is that I think the UI is just sort of, you're searching, you're getting answers. When I say plus, what I'm talking about is, I think there's also this opportunity to, when you run out of information that you can get from those sources, then use kind of a similar model, but where you're using agents to query the web to get information back and then return results. So you're sort of using that repository as long as the knowledge exists, and then complementing that. And then also have these specialized models to help with things like brainstorming, help with things like the specific things you do on the front end of innovation. So we're sort of merging a lot of the RAG functionality with this innovation functionality. I'm going to make one more comment and then I'll be done. So you're going to hear from Carson, you're going to hear from Muno. That is one lens into the impact this is having. I will also say I've been teaching entrepreneurship classes at Carnegie Mellon for 12 years now, thanks to Dave and a number of people here. I have never seen the speed at which these entrepreneurs are able to create things. So if you're in the Pittsburgh market, I realize you probably can't fly back in less than a week, but if you're in the Pittsburgh market, we have 11 student teams who've used these modern tools to build their startup, doing a demo day next week. I know that the MVP folks will be here, and actually Phil is going to have one of his associates there as well. So about 30 VCs in town. But if you want to see what students are able to do with these modern technologies, or how fast they're able to innovate, I would encourage you to come back. We'll be basically in the other Simmons, so like right across the wall next Wednesday afternoon. We'd love to see you there. Thanks so much.